Hello and welcome to the video. This is Chess on Toast's look at the FIDE Candidates Tournament currently running in London, and this is our game of the day for round 2. My name is Nick Murphy. With me as always, International Master Lorin D'Costa.
Hi, so the game we're going to look at today from the second round was one of the victories, and this was the victory from the Azerbaijani Grandmaster Timur Radjabov. And here he's playing against Vasily Ivanchuk, who we featured in the first video from round 1. So there Ivanchuk managed to draw that game with Grishuk, if you remember. But this time he unfortunately ends up on the wrong side of a very nice tactic by Radjabov. So the game started with d4, and Ivanchuk replied with d6. Now I think, for those who don't know who this guy is, Vasily Ivanchuk is one of the strongest players in the world, and he's capable of playing practically any opening. So I think this one might have come as a surprise, but then again, if your opponent's going to play absolutely anything, then
He's very hard to play against. Then you can't really prepare like you might do for someone.
Exactly.
Someone else.
Probably Radjabov went swimming in the morning instead, but who knows? Right. So now White could of course play e4 here, but this would lead to lots and lots of different variations, like knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4, knight c3, and then g6, which, for example, is the Perk defense or the modern defense. And that's for another day. But here Radjabov decided to play knight f3, and that prevents black from playing the free move e5. And then we saw g6, so again, another surprise. So here white can continue with e4, but this one then sort of go back into the modern defense with this idea, bishop to g7. And we've talked about that bishop raking across the whole board towards a1, and black will then try to attack in the center with c5 or e5 at a later date, very similar to the King's Indian
So
defense.
even though he's not pushing those two pawns in the middle, still attacking the centre, vying for space there, and also thinking about his pieces, where they are for the future.
That's right, he's going to attack the centre very soon, just not at the beginning. So Radjabov decided to play c4, which is sort of more in keeping with the Queen's Gambit. So when white plays d4, white often plays this other idea of c4 to try and control these centre squares. So although white has tried not to play e4 at the moment, he will be looking to that quite soon. And that's why Ivanchuk's next move was a little bit more of a surprise. He played f5. Now, that's not really the sort of move you recommend to a club player.
No,
of course, Ivanchuk is no club player. He's the sort of player that knows, well, every single type of opening, and he knows this is called the...
I've no idea what this is called.
And Nick, being our resident club player, if you don't know it, they're not going to know it either. It's actually called the Dutch. The Dutch defence, named probably by someone after the Dutch, or by someone who was Dutch who first played that. Not quite sure, not up with my chess history.
We've really done our research on these openings.
Well, what we do know is that it controls the e4 square, so let's just stick with that one right now. And black's going to follow up with knight to f6, so this doesn't look that bad. It looks a bit weird at the beginning, but over the next few moves you'll see that black's pieces sort of fit quite harmoniously. Yeah. So knight c3, sensible move, knight f6. And again, both sides fighting for the centre. And here we saw g3. Well, this is the main move that we saw the fianchetto in game number 1. And here we see the bishop trying to rake across the board that way. So black in kind responds to bishop g7, and both sides get developed. So just like in game 1, even though they're top players in the world, they're still doing the basic rules, aren't they?
It looks a bit more sensible now, because now he's castled and he's got that rook behind that f-pawn. It sort of looks like a position you might get, but when he first did it, I found it quite sort of, ooh, I didn't like the idea of pushing that f-pawn so soon, but now it makes sense.
Makes a bit more sense, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
The bishop on c8 might be a little bit sort of upset that that pawn on f5 is in the way, but then again, the bishop doesn't have to go out that way to g4, does it?
No.
And as you said, the rook's free as well. So black swapped one advantage for another disadvantage, which is basically what chess is about, isn't it?
Sure.
Now in this position, I couldn't possibly again try to go through all the different moves here, but black decides to go c6. The other main move is queen e8. Again, looks a bit strange, but black really wants to play this pawn break, pawn to e5. So just like in the game number 1 we saw between Grishuk and Ivanchuk, whatever the opening is, you get your pieces out, you castle early, and then you look to strike in the centre with a pawn break. So queen e8 would try and sort of do that.
Yep.
And white could respond with d5. Because if black goes e5, do we know the en passant rule here at Chess on Toast?
Yes, we certainly do. This is one of the first rules we learned, and it's taking the pawn, but by moving the pawn to e6. So it looks initially, it's one of those odd moves. It's a bit like castling. It's not the sort of obvious move.
Nope. And after bishop takes e6, white can now show the power of this idea of d5 by playing knight to d4. Now the b7 pawn is being attacked by the bishop on g2. So a lot going on there, and that's for another day. So instead, Ivanchuk played the other move, c6. And apparently here Radjabov had quite a long think. Obviously he knows what he's doing, but there have been so many moves played in this position. I mean, any logical move will be sensible.
So even though he would be familiar with this position, he's really sort of trying to see what would be best against his current opponent.
That's right.
Different opponents, you have different tactics for them, don't you?
Exactly. Well, as we said, he's probably been surprised up to this point even.
Sure.
So why play the main move, which is actually d5? This is something I've personally played myself quite a few times.
You think, well, if you're going to play this, your opponent is probably going to be expecting it. So
That's right.
You might play something a little bit less common to try and surprise them.
Exactly, which is why you played something else. So after, for example, e5, d takes e6, bishop takes e6. I've had this quite a few times. I mean, there's an interesting exchange sacrifice where white plays b3 to defend the pawn on c4. And it looks a little bit dodgy because now the knight can come to e4 and the bishop can rake down towards that rook on a1, something that the bishop's always proud of trying to do. But unfortunately in this position, white can play knight takes e4, bishop takes a1, and I think the best move is bishop g5 here, with an attack on the queen and an attack on the bishop. It's actually a little bit more than that, because when the queen moves, can't quite take the bishop because of the knight, although we could do, but I think maybe knight takes d6. I mean, there's been a lot said about this, but basically this is quite good for white. So d5 is the main move, but here Radjabov after c6 plays rook b1, and that's another sensible move because it gets the rook out of the firing line of this bishop towards a1, and maybe white might consider pumping the b pawn up the board like this and trying to get his bishop all the way in towards a8.
Wow.
So again, there's a reason behind that move, and like with any game or any move that you play, if you play a move and you say, well, I have a reason for doing it, that's good. If you don't, it means you're kind of playing rock, paper, scissors when you're playing chess.
Sure.
And that's not really something that Chess on Toast
Interesting.
advocates.
I mean, from my certainly point of view, that's a very long-term plan. That's one of the longest-term plans we've looked at in a Chess on Toast video, because I can see that pawn on b7 and the pawn on c6, and you think that diagonal's pretty safe, but he's got a long-term plan to break up that pawn formation.
Exactly. So black played knight e4. Obviously black could, well, we can't really move the bishop out. Where does the knight go? Because if black goes, for example, knight a6, then this allows white to play exactly what he wants. And when the pawn comes to b5, he will actually be attacking the knight. So, but I still think this is, as far as I remember, the best move. I mean, black can go knight c7 now. And, I don't know, b5, bishop d7. I think this is supposed to be roughly equal, but pretty unclear. But instead, Ivanchuk went knight e4. Do you think white should take that knight?
It seems too obvious to take the knight. I think probably there's going to be some. I think that, the pawn is going to be a problem. I think when you take back.
Well, it changes the nature of the position. But after pawn takes, knight takes e4, pawn takes e4. The knight's got to move somewhere, and now black's got d5. So the pawn on c6 now looks quite useful, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it protects that one, which in turn protects that one, and also the rook on f8 has an open line towards f2. May not be completely useful right now, but you never know.
Black seems to have a lot of space here, and
That's right. And then pawn h6 will kick the knight back to it can't go to f3, can it? We can take that one off. It can only go to h3, which is on the side of the board. So after knight e4, white could take the knight, but he decided not to. Instead, he played a much more interesting plan, which is queen c2, and it forces black to do something about the knight now. If black were to go d5, I'm not sure this is that recommendable, because now we don't have to take the knight on e4. We can play bishop f4 and try and come in on e5. So the black bishop on c8 now looks even worse. And black doesn't really want to push this pawn here, because black needs to control this e5 square and possibly try and punt his pawn, in the pawn breaks idea. So d5 basically not really what black wants to do. It's not losing, of course, but not really. So knight takes c3, and Radjabov just took with the b pawn. He's given himself double pawns voluntarily, but the rook on b1 now has a similar idea to its counterpart on f8. It's trying to get in the game, isn't it?
Yeah.
And now the bishop on c8 hasn't really got a lot of scope. It's got to stay there.
If he hadn't played that rook b1 move earlier, he probably wouldn't have taken back with the pawn and doubling his pawns. He
could have taken with the queen, but then he's walking into this bishop, isn't he?
Yeah, but what I mean is just because now that rook's on b1, it makes more sense, doesn't it? Even more sense to take with the pawn.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Ivanchuk decided, well, I've got to do something. So he went e5, which is the move that I've just been talking about, the pawn break idea. And over the next few moves, you see white actually take advantage of the fact that these pieces on the queen side are really kind of slow in getting out. I mean, structurally, which means like the way the pawns are situated, white is doing quite badly, I suppose, with those pawns. But chess is more than that. Radjabov realised that his activity of his pieces, as you see, pretty much all of white's pieces are better than their opponents.
It's funny, one of the things we've talked about quite a lot is developing your pieces, getting your pieces out. And here we have Vasily Ivanchuk, a 27-57 rated player, who's still got 3 of his pieces haven't left the start, aren't doing anything.
Exactly. So, and this actually gets punished in the game. So the rook's being attacked, rook f7, and white decided to bring the rook on f1 into the game. Where's a sensible square?
d1.
Yep, excellent.
Looks very inviting.
When you can attack a piece with tempo, which means like gaining of time. Here the black queen, it's being attacked, so black still has no time. And black could have gone knight d7, but maybe he thought...
pieces look a bit cramped then.
Well, I'm in a pin now, and it's a bit dodgy. So he decided to step out the way. Probably still thought that things were okay. And now Radjabov just went straight for it. So e4. After takes, the question is, should white take the pawn on e4 with the queen, or is there a better move?
I can't.
Well, I can't put on the spot, but
maybe something like putting the knight onto g5.
Yes, knight g5 is actually the best move. Well done, Nick. Because after this, bishop f5 would skewer us. But unfortunately for black, knight g5 is a very nice move, and not only does it attack the rook, but it threatens to play knight take, or sort of threatens positionally to play knight takes e4, and the knight will be threatening to come into d6. And now it would really sort of show up black's bad queenside development. So black would be in big trouble there. So Ivanchuk had to keep the position closed, and he decided to play f4. And now Radjabov noticed the idea of this open d file. So he decided to abandon the b file and just bring his rook to d3 in order to possibly bring the other one in behind it.
Okay.
And that would set up a lovely pin on d8, wouldn't it?
It would.
So takes g3. I mean, I don't really like that move, but black decided the rook has to be opened on f8. On f7. H takes g3, always capturing towards the centre if you can. Knight a6. Yeah, again, there's not really much to say. The knight's quite bad. So
it doesn't really have anywhere good to go, does it?
Knight g5. The rook is being kicked away. He could have gone to f6, but I just don't like this for black after rook d1. How do you stop rook d8 with a pin across here?
Not easily.
Not easily. See, black's really suffering from this bishop. So knight g5, rook c7, bishop d6. Notice that it's constant attacking for white. He's using his lead and development to keep attacking. So bishop f6. Well, he could have moved the rook immediately, but as you'll see in the game, white's got ideas of bishop h3 here. Possibly he might have just considered playing c5 and just keeping this fantastic bishop on d6. And black's pieces are awful, aren't they?
The rook and the bishop haven't come off the squares. That knight's squashed in the side. It just doesn't look good for black.
So bishop f6 are trying to hope. Well, I mean, if white takes the rook, of course he wins an exchange. But I think that now black's rook wasn't as good as the bishop on d6, and now black can consider this and maybe playing bishop g4. So black gets a little bit of compensation.
So one of those situations where you don't want to just take a piece because you can. You want to think about the whole sort of board and
exactly.
The consequences.
This is what the top players do. They don't just take pieces because they know that it's worth more than.
Yeah, you're not going, oh well, the rook's worth 5, the bishop's worth 3, therefore I'll take it. There's more to it than that.
Exactly. So queen g2 is played, which defends the knight and possibly threatens some business down here. Rook d7, but the rook doesn't escape very far because of bishop h3. And now Ivanchuk played rook g7, so he's being kind of attacked, but if white's not careful he's going to escape. But now white uncorked an absolutely fantastic idea here. Either Ivanchuk missed it as black, or he just thought, well, there's nothing I can do about it. But we've been talking about this idea here, haven't we?
Yeah.
Like, about how white would like to take advantage of that. But yes, black has 2 pieces defending it, but they're both defending this e5 pawn, aren't they? So white just played bishop takes e5.
Wow.
An absolutely amazing move.
That's amazing, because what... Oh, gosh, yeah, because...
That's a top-level move, that is.
At first glance, I just think, well, he's just given up his bishop. But of course, yeah.
He can't take that because he gets pinned.
And this is what actually happened in the game.
This is what happened in the game. And if black plays queen takes, it leads to an even prettier idea, because white can just give up the rook as well. Check. bishop takes, queen takes, and now it's a kind of smothered mate idea, isn't it?
Oh wow!
The rook blocks the king's escape, so it's going to be checkmate in 2 moves after the queen e8 only move takes. So black has really suffered from the fact that his rook and bishop are not in the game. That's the thing that club players need to take from this game. Even as such a strong player, has been neglected his development, and he's been severely punished.
One of the real top players in the world, and the ideas that we talk about in Chess on Toast are coming through even for them.
So after bishop takes e5, black decided to give up the queen, with rook d8. Bishop takes h3, but of course Radjabov had worked out that even though he wins the queen, the knight's still on it, so rook takes check, rook takes, and knight takes h3. And the game
so he's now got what? He's got a queen and a pawn for the bishop and
that's right,
rook.
And he actually mopped up quite easily after this. So what can the club player learn from that? Well, whilst you may not have seen an opening before, the basic rules apply even at the top level. You've got to get your pieces out and you've got to fight for the centre. And I think when black, he just basically didn't do that and he got completely punished. So excellent play by white, by Radjabov, one of the top players in the world. But just goes to show you've got to stick to the basics, which is what we teach week in, week out at Chess on Toast.
Absolutely. Well, it's fantastic to see these ideas that we talk about, and we talk about it at the sort of junior and improving player level, still being applied at the very top of world chess. Well, thank you for that, Lorin, and thank you for that look on round 2 of the London FIDE candidates. We'll be back tomorrow with round 3.